our official program, and you see we are being recorded. So here we are. We want to officially welcome you all to our racism discussion series number 9, Systemic Racism, Voting Rights. This is our 9th in the series, and again, we're glad that you're here. So as many of you already know, this is being sponsored by the Lake Sumter branch of the American Association of University Women, AAUW. The organization was founded in 1881 with a mission to advance equity for women and girls. And our Lake Sumter branch is over 41 years old, working towards those same aims. We believe that equality or equity for women and girls will bring equity for all people. So on our plan today, we're again going to be going into breakout groups, and we will do anonymous polling. So let's see exactly what we're going to be doing today. All right, so today we're going to be showing you 2 videos. The first is going to be voter suppression. It's the American way. The second is going to be a clip from with Brian Williams from MSNBC, and the clip is Kennedy and Abrams, Kennedy Gets Schooled. We're going to then go into our breakout groups. We'll have our large discussion. We'll do a poll, our anonymous polling questions. We'll then have announcements. So that is the plan for today. So if we could, let's start showing the first video. It's the voter suppression. It's the American way.
Will do. Share screen. Voter suppression. Is it up, Jackie?
It is.
There's a lot of talk about voting these days. All of the cliches, your vote is your voice. Shut up and vote. Be woke, vote. Rock the vote. Rightfully so, I guess. There's an election happening right now. But there are some people who don't give a damn about voting. You've heard them. Why vote? My vote doesn't count. It doesn't matter. I used to think that. And if I'm honest, I still think that way every once in a while. But then I think about all the time, energy, strategies, and downright hate that has gone into suppressing some people's right to vote. In other words, if my vote doesn't matter, why are folks trying so hard to stop me from casting it? Power. Back in the day when they started this new world, they decided it should be ruled by the people. But they weren't talking about black people or women. So when it came to voting, you had to be white with a penis and own some land. These white men understood that the people who vote have the power to elect those who govern, and those who govern make the laws that keep them in power. But at some point, the US fought a war with itself, and black people came out on the other side with a few rights. One of them was the right to vote, for black men at least. Now that they were voting, white dudes realized they had a problem. These black people can vote us out of office. Wait, I got an idea. Since we made it damn near impossible for them to read while they were enslaved, let's make a literacy test that they have to pass in order to cast a ballot. But of course, black people started passing the test. And then the powers that be thought, I know what. You know how we don't have slaves anymore, but we still could use free labor? How about we arrest them, charge them with a felony, and exploit them for work? And then we got a double win, because we'll make a law that prohibits felons from voting. And for those we don't lock up, we'll just keep them poor and charge them a poll tax. Today, you can't call a poll tax. But that doesn't mean the bullshit still doesn't exist. We got voter ID laws that cost taxpayers a lot of money. They mainly hurt black and brown people and reduce voter turnout. And we still got felon voting laws. Even though a couple of years ago, the people of Florida decided it was time for former felons to be able to vote. But Republicans were like, nah, that's gonna f our numbers up. So they threw another roadblock. Felons today have to pay all of their court fees before they can get in the booth. So if you don't have a few $1,000 laying around, no vote for you, buddy. And look at this nonsense. You see this jigsaw piece that doesn't look like it fits anywhere? It's a district map that manipulates the vote by putting power all in one place. You see, all this slickery trickery, it's about power. And the voters give power to who they elect. And those they elect want to keep this power. So they do their damnedest to control who votes. So when they say your vote is your power, they ain't lying. The tactics just keep coming. In Texas, they only have one ballot drop box per county. Do you know how big the counties are in Texas? In Georgia, people are waiting in line for more than 10 hours to vote, as if they're giving away iPhone 22. In California, they're burning ballots with fire. And voters in Florida, they're getting threatening emails trying to punk them into not voting, saying, vote Trump or else. Or else what? You know, this is some sneaky shit that's happening right in front of our faces. Right now, the elephants in the room are center stage with President Trump calling on his army of poll watchers to make sure that there's no fraud at the booth.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Reminds me of a tactic used back in the day. When it comes to voting by mail, Trump wants people to believe that it's a whole big scam, but it ain't. Want to know how I know? Look at all these guys doing it. At the risk of sounding like a public service announcement, I got a public service announcement. Don't let anyone ever convince you that your vote doesn't matter. The reason they don't want you to vote is that they're afraid you'll take from them what they hope you forget you have: power.
And just before we before we show the next video, I apologize, I didn't prepare you properly. In case there was some language that offended any of you, we want to apologize, but we felt that the message was important enough that we wanted to share that with you. So please, again, excuse us if we offended anyone, but sometimes the greater message supersedes language. So Linda, if you'll show the next one, I don't think, other than perhaps the ideology, I don't think we'll offend anyone, but you never know.
Here it comes.
Thanks, Linda. And here we have,
Last thing before we go tonight, let's talk about a guy, Senator John No Relation Kennedy of the great state of Louisiana. He's the one who likes to play the role of the country lawyer, maybe even the beloved small town barber or general store manager. It's a down-home persona that masks a first-class education at Vanderbilt, Oxford, UVA Law School, magna cum laude undergrad, law review executive editor, you get the rest, all that scholarly stuff. At Senate hearings, he goes big on the down-home phraseology and cute aphorisms. With witnesses, he likes to play the role of, I'm just a guy from Louisiana asking questions. But at a hearing this week, he might have met his match when he asked Stacey Abrams if she knew what was in that Georgia voter suppression law.
You're against the Georgia bill, I gather. Is that right?
I'm against certain provisions of it, yes.
Okay, I think you've called it a racist bill. Am I right?
I think there are provisions of it that are racist, yes.
Okay. Tell me specifically, just give me a list of the provisions that you object to.
I object to the provisions that remove access to the right to vote, that shorten the federal runoff period from 9 weeks to 4 weeks, that restrict the time that a voter can request and return an absentee ballot application, that eliminate...
Slow down for me, because our audio is not real good here. Okay, what else?
It bans nearly all out-of-precinct votes.
Bans what? I'm sorry.
It bans nearly all out-of-precinct votes.
Okay.
Meaning that if you get to a precinct and you are in line for 4 hours and you get to the end of the line and you are not there between 5 and 7 p.m.
Okay.
You
What
have
else?
to start all over again.
Is that everything?
No, it is not. No, sir. It restricts the hours of operation because it now, under the guise of setting a standardized timeline, it makes it optional for counties that may not want to see expanded access to the right to vote. They can now limit their hours. Instead of those hours being from 7 to 7, they're now from 9 to 5, which may have an effect on voters who cannot vote during business hours during early voting. It limits the
Okay, I get the idea. I get the idea.
So that there was Stacey Abrams, Spelman College magna cum laude graduate, UT Austin, Truman Scholar, Yale Law School, offering a primer on the Georgia voter suppression law to Senator John No Relation Kennedy of Louisiana to take us off the air tonight. With that, that is our broadcast for this Wednesday, with our thanks for being here with us. On behalf of all my colleagues at the networks of NBC News, good night.
Wow, that's really something, isn't it? Hard to believe that this is going on again now, right before our very eyes. And here we go. And here is here's a quote from Isabel Wilkerson in her book Cast that puts a fine point on what we just witnessed. I find that white people are fine with me, she said, as long as I stay in my place, as long as I stay in the container we have built for you. She tapped the side of the sugar bowl, gentle, insistent taps. As soon as I get out of the container, she said, lifting the lid from the bowl, it's a problem. So all of this certainly gives us a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. So we're going to go into our breakout rooms. And here is the question that we are going to ask you to discuss. Do current voter suppression efforts affect white voters as well as people of color? Do current voter suppression efforts affect white voters as well as people of color? You'll have 15 minutes for discussion in your small groups. Nothing's going to be recorded at the time, and please remember, don't talk for more than 2 to 3 minutes to be sure everyone in your group has an opportunity to speak. We'll give you a 1-minute warning when it's time to wrap up and return to the large meeting. So we'll see you back here after that. You all should have received a message giving you your breakout room number. And with your invitation, all you have to do is hit join and you'll go into your breakout room and we'll see you back. And we can stop recording. We'll pause. Let's pause. 16. Okay. Okay, we want to welcome all of you back. We hope you've had some rich discussions, and we're really looking forward to hearing what you've come up with. Again, we'd like to hear your personal experience, thoughts, feelings, not the group summary. So remember, please, to use your electronic hand, and you'll be called on in the order in which you raised it, unless we have some comment that's made in between. So if you would, we're being respectful, but we also might want to make sure if there's someone makes a comment that We will try and be timely with people responding to a comment. Okay, so we're ready to hear from you. Good.
Well, I'm sorry. Linda, I hit the wrong thing. I needed to ask you to unmute. So Linda Roberts had her hand up first.
Okay, Linda.
Thanks, Linda. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Well, you know, in reading the material in advance, I listed 9 elements that comprise different voting rights suppression. Now, let me just list them because I think it's important. One is absentee voting. One is the voter ID rules, purges, where states are permitted to purge individuals from the voting rolls if they don't vote a certain number of times in a row. Certain states have those provisions. Early voting, the issue of felons and previous felons not being able to vote, or as in Florida, only able to vote if they've paid unpaid court fees. Curbing registration drives, inability to vote in Washington, D.C. and U.S. territories, requirement for English literacy to vote, and voting hours. So in looking at all of these different elements, my view was that the current voter suppression efforts do affect all voters, because all voters are affected by those elements in some way or another. However, I think the follow-on thought on that is that they do disproportionately affect people of color. So that was the conclusion I drew from just understanding these different efforts and their effect on different parts of society.
Thank you, Linda, and certainly appreciate your calling those out. So that can be very helpful. We may even ask you to share those. I don't know if we want to put it in the chat, but certainly we'll keep those in mind. And again, thank you for delineating. And that's very effective. We appreciate it. So thank you. Let's Suzanne Young Mercer.
Suzanne.
Hi. So one of the points that I made in our group was the fact that yes, what's going to happen with the way they're doing this voter suppression is that of course it's going to affect white people in those communities, and they're not, and they're not overly concerned because, white people who aren't going to vote for what their platform is people they don't want to vote, they don't want to give the right to vote to either. And they know now, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement that happened after the George Floyd incident, that there's many, we've come together and people are realizing what's going on. Not that they probably didn't, but it became so obvious with that, that particular incident, that there's lots of people that they don't want to vote if they're not going to vote for the power structure that's in place now, or will be in place with all of these voter suppression laws that they're putting into effect. Because by the next midterm election, if all of this stuff stays in place and when we don't have the numbers we need, the Senate's going to go back, the representatives are, we're going to lose a lot of stuff, and, we're going to be back where we started, and, priming ourselves up for whoever is going to be the Republican presidential person for 2024. So, yeah, that's my, that's what I see.
So Suzanne, you really come down in support of that first video we saw. It's a power issue.
Absolutely. It's all about power, because we know that in around 2050, 52, whites are going to lose their majority. You know, people of color will be the majority. You know, the whites will be the minority. People of color will be the majority. They're not trying, so they're trying to put all their ducks in a row so that they stay in power as long as possible after that even occurs. And so we're struggling, you know, because Trump and McConnell put a lot of federal judges in, and the courts are where they win a lot of their stuff. And all of those judges they put in were conservative judges. I mean, so those are people that stay in office for years. I mean, they retire from office. So we're going to be struggling with all of the laws they're going to put in place that's going to inhibit or prohibit us from doing the things we need to do to get back to some kind of semblance of normality.
So really, we have to be sure this is not just, sometimes what happens, I think we've witnessed, there'll be an issue that comes up, a lot of people rally around it, including whites, and then the next issue comes up and we forget about it. But I think the point I think that I'm grasping too from what you're saying, Suzanne, and certainly what I see is we can never let up on this until things really change. This is not just trending, and certainly our committee is not working on this just because it's an issue that's currently on the table. All of these issues, we know we have to continue to work for in order to keep going until the changes happen that we have justice and equity in this country. So I think I captured a little of that. And
There are a couple comments in the chat about that. And,
great.
you know, I get the sense that we're here kind of preaching to the choir, but that's okay. I enjoy talking to people who agree with me. We had recommended a while back, and I will recommend it again, the book, The Sum of Us. I think Judy Southard had read it and agreed. Christine, I see you going, yeah. Heather McGee really elaborates in very clear but detailed manner how we all suffer, how it hurts everyone. And I think people don't realize that. The part that's astonishing to me is that white people are so willing to have their rights restricted just so that people of color stay in their place. And it makes me crazy. Katie Haviland has her hand up.
Just a comment, Linda, when you mentioned preaching to the choir, that was one of the comments in our group that, you know, we're not just the choir, because we're all learning. We're all becoming more aware. We're all getting our eyes opened. We need to keep our ears open. We need to get our mouths open and get the word out and keep this before us. It's not a passing thing, and things are the way that they are because we have stood back instead of trying to keep ourselves aware and enlightened. And, you know, that's what you're doing with this whole series, is helping us to become enlightened. And I don't see us as the choir. I see us as part of the troops out there that just don't know what's going on and aren't really aware of the subtle, insidious maneuvers and law changes that are happening. We've just got to get out and vote. As Joni said, for every election, not just the presidential election, but what's happening on every level.
That down ballot, the local elections, the state elections, you bet. Thank you.
And also,
Christine.
Excuse me, just to go on with that, Katie, thank you. We know that educating ourselves is the first step, but you know, again, we're becoming educated. That's only a beginning, and it's a good beginning, but we know there's more. And I know people are asking, what can we do? We'll get to, hopefully we will, at some point, we'll get to more of that and look forward to suggestions. But go ahead, Linda, you were asking the next person to speak.
Christine.
Yeah, so in our group, we were talking about the US postal system and how, I mean, I was really shocked to see that as the strategy used. And so to basically destroy our postal system so that mail-in ballots would not get in on time, and then make sure the laws, they could challenge like, oh, well, this came in after the deadline, so we can't count it. Well, it was mailed a week and a half early, but because the postal system is not doing automatic sorting, it took 2 weeks to get in, you know. So that was our big one. And that's one that we felt that white people across America are really are taking notice of. And I remember some of the Western state Republican House of Representatives and senators, they were up in arms because so many of their people depend on the Postal Service for medicines and other things. But that's a big one that has spilled over to affect everyone.
That's a good point. My sister-in-law lives in a town called Columbia, Maryland. It's between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. We sent her a birthday card. It took 2 weeks to get to her. I think they must have sent it by carrier pigeon.
Yeah.
But you can still see the impact of that. What's interesting to me, as our committee was planning these discussions, I think it was Jackie who made the comment about how she is just amazed by the creativity and the deviousness with which these maneuvers are made. And it brought us into a discussion of the language of racism. So currently, according to the legislators who are pushing these kinds of bills, they're not suppressing the vote. They're protecting the integrity of the elections. So yet again, the deviousness, the creativity, all the areas that this seeps into, and it impacts daily life. It really is appalling.
And
Go ahead, Jackie.
Excuse me, thanks. One of the things on this book, some of us, is so painful to read. And it's unfortunate, I think, that if it takes whites to realize what they're losing before they're willing to think about how it impacts everyone else. Even though I don't like that mentality, maybe we'll wake up and say, we're all in this together. It affects everyone. Why should everyone suffer for these antiquated, holding on to these prejudicial and thoughts and ideas, this fear of losing power? But again, I think it's unfortunate if things don't change because we recognize the injustice. But as I say, if it takes whites to recognize it, if the outcome is we make changes, at least the changes will come. I would hate it's that mentality, but change needs to take place, in my opinion. But we want to hear from the rest of you and not just from the diversity committee.
Carolyn Deal is next.
I just wanted to share that I have a sister in Florida who was convicted of a felony in 2010, and she's out now. She still has probation, but she had paid her fees and fines, and she registered to vote, and she was able to vote in November. And now she's gotten a jury service notice. So even though, Florida's doing all they can, to suppress the vote for felons, they don't have the administrative steps in place to even know if people, are on probation, how much they owe in fees and fines, unless they, actually go, so the records aren't synced at all. So there's a couple organizations that are encouraging felons to try to register to vote, see if you can, vote, so she did, so we'll see what happens.
She's also white, is she not?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
That was a little jaded on my part.
Yeah.
Thank you.
White woman. Yeah.
Yeah. Lisa.
I'm going to have to go here shortly, so I was hoping to just bring in some ideas for action. And I love this one thing I read once was, it's to create a just society begins with the recognition of the fundamental truth that humanity is one. But it is not enough to simply believe in this in our hearts. It creates the moral imperative to act and view all our aspects of our personal, social, and institutional lives through the lens of justice. And when a girlfriend of mine, because I said, I'm getting so mad this time when I read all these. This is something I didn't know about all the voting rights and how 2013, they said racism is ended, so they can now take away the laws that kept states in line. That threw me over the edge, that now it's a free-for-all, for states to get trickery and slickery, what that gentleman said. I think we should all pass the video we watched at the very beginning, even with the language, to all our friends and family. At our dinner table, start with our family. Let's have these tough conversations with our own families. We did last night with our neighbors, because I said I was coming to this today. That can be passed on. This information you give us, even the Encyclopedia Britannica, it was just really, really so good to educate. But I think we have to have the conversations at our own kitchen tables and devote ourselves to loving people more. That's it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Appreciate it.
Jackie, while you sort through where you're going, because I don't see any other hands up.
Yes. I will. Yeah.
Talking about this is one of the hardest things to do. And talking about it with people when you don't know where they're coming from is dicey. So I think at some point, and note to self for the committee, we need to really talk directly about how to talk about this with people who are not either like-minded or interested in hearing what you have to say. I think that's a real challenge. And unfortunately, it's a challenge for many of us right in our own families. So I think it's way past time for us to very directly confront the racism that undergirds this country. It's there, and if you deny it, you're not watching. Jackie, I lied. Suzanne has.
Okay, because we have a comment.
Okay. Go ahead, Suzanne, or do we want to do the comment first?
Let's just going back in terms of response, that the laws, the point was made, K. Meyer, the laws also impact seniors and women as much as people of color and people in rural areas as well. And it also negatively affects people with disabilities and access to functional needs. So just wanted to add that Kay shared with the rest, and let's turn it over then to Suzanne, and then we have another question for you all.
So my only additional comment is that I think it was Katie that said that the fact that we're having these conversations is important, because what we know about ourselves, and even myself as an African American woman, is that we come to the table with our biases, right? We believe, we have belief systems that we have acquired over time. And even when we think we are enlightened, we have come to understand that there's things we all still can learn about, you know, because I come to the table with my perspective, you know, and you know, they talk about, you know, I don't understand what's the matter with white people. There's, you know, there's the book, What's the Matter with Kansas? And the fact that Linda, I think Linda said it, that, you know, white people will do, or I'm not sure who said it, but, you know, white people will not even see how impacting my rights actually impacts their own rights. It really pulls us all down, because I think I've said this before. When the tide rises, all boats rise. And so why would you want to prohibit me from achieving what I can? You're going to always achieve what you can. So, you know, we all do better when we all do better. It's a, you know, common, you know, it's a stupid cliche, but it's true. We all do better when we all do better. And so this is the first step, and the difficult conversation that you are going to have with anyone is always going to be, you have to test the waters, because what we need to do is, when we're having a conversation with somebody who says something that you absolutely don't believe in, you need to call them out on it. You might, you know, you don't have to get, just like we say here, we're going to disagree, we're going to disagree without being disagreeable. You just need to say that, you know, if we're going to have a conversation, you can't talk that way because that's not true. And here's the reasons why. And I'll give you more information if you want to look it up. But we have to call people out. And I think that's how we start, because we definitely have to start.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. Good point. So,
And Shepherd.
Yeah, the talk about how these changes in the voting laws affect all of us gave me an idea for talking to people who probably don't care about somebody who's different from them. But the idea of it affecting all of us, maybe we can get into discussions where we're actually asking other people how it might affect them. The change in the voting laws might affect them and their family, or their friends, neighbors, whatever, because we can see that there are many groups that are affected by the change. And the idea that if they get on board for their own self-interest, then they're going to be working in everyone's self-interest.
That's a good point, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's interesting because, and then we'll listen to, we have one more, because it's something we are thinking about as well, which is, what do we gain if everyone can participate in the voting process? But we have some more comments, I think.
Yeah, we have a gentleman who, his name is evidently Racism Discussion Number 9. Jump on in.
I guess that's me. It's Andrew. I wasn't sure how to fill out that the form to join, but in any case, what I wanted to add was something that Suzanne mentioned, and it's I don't think a lot of people understand that a rising ship or a rising water raises all ships. The attitude, I think, is what someone else said. I'll vote against myself if, or some of my people being white, meaning white, if it denies Black people the same rights of citizenship. And I think what backs this up is that, at least according to the New York Times, the study of who participated in that January 6th invasion of the Capitol, they were not poor people. they were middle class. They were teachers. They were all kinds of what we would call professional white people. And so they felt any good that comes to the Black community and to immigrants hurts them. And it comes back to the question of power. And they insist on maintaining their power, even though some white people will be hurt by it. They don't care. So that.
Andrew, that's a great comment. And I would add that in addition to that fear of loss of power, it's a fear of a loss of privilege.
Yes.
And you see it in virtually every area that you can think of. There was an article not long ago in our local rag talking about admissions to higher education and changes that have been made of late with respect to requiring SAT or ACT scores and having those dropped. And the result is that a few more students of color were admitted to top tier schools, and some white kids who thought they had it locked were not admitted. Can you imagine the rage that he and his family was feeling? The playing field was leveled. So here's something that I think we really need to consider. It has been said that we don't want the zero-sum game. That is the way people look at it now. If you get something more, then I have something less. And we are saying, no, that's not correct. Everybody is raised. But in point of fact, there is a loss here on the part of white people, and it's their privilege and their power. And that's not something you can put your hands around very quickly. So when you say to someone, no, it's your privilege and power that you're losing. No, I don't have privilege. So I don't know how to address the true level of what the loss is and why people are not wanting to give that up. So I think that follows on Suzanne's comment and yours, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, but let's listen, hear what some of the others.
Okay, Alita was next. I did not have you unmute. Now you need to unmute.
Okay, good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
And gentlemen.
Morning.
I think I heard that we're going to be discussing solutions later, but everything that I'm hearing is about what can we do now and how we should be able to talk to people openly and honestly about the issues, and we can't because we don't want to get into an argument. But what the Republicans have always done is they have the long view. And so I don't think it is possible in most cases to change the minds of people. So what we need to do, if we take it from the long view, and they're already aware of this, is to start teaching our children. So we need to bring things into the curriculum where there's some counterbalance to what they're seeing and hearing in their families, so that they can learn or relearn what they come into this earth with. You know, little kids love everybody, but somewhere along the way, they learn how to hate different groups of people. And as long as they stay within their own families and their communities, there's no balance to that. So if we could take the long view, we being all of us on this call, all Democrats, all liberals, whatever, but get something into our educational system that shows our kids that we're all created equal. So it's the end of my comment.
That's a wonderful point. And I think for those of you who were, when we did the Confederate monuments, we saw how the Confederate daughters the daughters of the Confederacy had such sway in what went into the textbooks. Yeah. And how that influenced our children. So great point. What a reminder. And certainly it does. It starts with our children and what we do and how we talk about it. And perhaps we need to get involved with that educational system to see if those textbooks can be changed and what's taught in the schools. Thank you so much, Alida.
SB is next.
Oh,
Hi.
okay.
After listening to most of you and about this voter suppression, I came to my mind that, hey, power corrupts. These politicians wanted to stay in power and they're gonna do anything to corrupt the society. Now and then I heard about the fear, yes, way back from day one about the white supremacy and all that racism, there's underlying fear that you're gonna take away the goodness that I am having now, if you are, So what I learned, which I got it from Linda, fear is nothing, nothing to be feared in life, only to be understood. What I came out to is maybe we're doing it now with this project we're doing, is educate people. Yes, you're gonna still keep your whatever you have and it will enhance what you have. That's what you were saying to some of us, that principle there. And for the politicians, yes, you can stay in power. If you do the right thing, people will go for you. But I don't really understand myself about how corrupt one could be when you got power. Not all of them, but some of them. So how corrupt they could be, and you have seen it on a day-to-day news, all the forms of corruption. This voter suppression, in my opinion, is one way of corrupting people. That's all that I could share. Thank you.
Thank you, SB.
Linda Roberts.
Yeah, thank you. Just one follow-up comment. Just my view of this is we talked about the fact that, we should look at it from the standpoint that positive developments raise all boats, and so why can't we understand that it raises all boats and benefits everyone? But go back to what I said in the beginning, that that these suppression efforts disproportionately affect people of color. A number of them, like, the impact as felons, voter ID rules tend to disproportionately affect poor people and people of color. The inability to vote in Washington, D.C. and U.S. territories obviously affects people of color disproportionately. So I think what white people are thinking is that, well, yeah, these things, if we relax these or eliminate these suppressive efforts, it's going to raise one of my boats, but it's going to raise 3 of your boats, you see. So that disproportionate impact, I think, is one of the reasons that, they don't want to, even if some white people are affected, they feel that Black people will be disproportionately benefited from eliminating these efforts.
And I think thank you, Linda, good point. I think when we start looking through the lens of justice, perhaps we will be willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to give some of my privilege up so that everyone can benefit, but that requires maturity. So, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there.
Katie Haviland.
This goes back to a comment I think that you, Linda, made, and we'll follow up on Linda Roberts. It's a question of where am I on the totem pole? And so all these other boats rising are going to shift me down or up, or maybe make more totem poles where there are more people that are on the same level that I am. And so leveling the playing field, an expression that Linda Carpenter used, leveling the playing field, I'm not so sure I want it level if it's going to mean that I'm going to have either more competition at whatever level I'm at, or my place on that totem pole is going to be lower. So it's issues that we need to kind of face head on. And again, another comment of how do we open the discussion so it's not confrontational? And in that book, See No Stranger, where it talks about love and openness and listening, hearing what it is that causes the other person to be the way they are, to think the way they think, what has been their grow up experiences. And Jackie, you referred again to the power of the Daughters of the Confederacy. Man, they just put thoughts, put the words in the books that the children had at school, just fed their minds and their hearts with, this is how life should be lived. And now trying to do unlearning all of that or backtracking on that, that's part of what we're dealing with right now.
We have a comment from Suzanne Young Mercer that we need to, where did it go? We need to understand who's promoting the current school curriculum. They're already changing historical reference to slavery and changing how Africans arrived in this country. So we hope that that change is going to be more accurate. We know it's not. Oh, okay, it's staying and worse. So that's why it's so important thank you, Suzanne. That's why it's so important for us to educate ourselves. We have a lot of resources that we've shared with you. There are more that we will. We'll talk about some of them after, but there's an unbelievable program called Exterminate the Brute. It's on Netflix. It's very painful, but it certainly gives quite an accounting that's very different from most of the history that we've learned in school. I think, very important for
Jackie,
us.
I think that's on HBO.
Okay. Either one, we'll put it in the, when we send you all updated resources. It's also a book, Exterminate the Brute. It's hard to watch, but boy, is it an eye opener. So I will say I highly recommend it.
Christine Loken Kim has a comment.
Thank you.
I think Charles was waving his hand.
I'm sorry, Charles, I didn't see that. I was looking at electronic hands. Christine, can you hang on a minute and let Charles speak first? Because he hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. You need to unmute, Charles.
Chuck.
As a humor statement, I've been in the room and not seen before. My comment was, as we talk about this, and I was part of an organization in Delaware while there, and the group, as I was leaving that group, they were applauding that, wow, he's leaving. He's not going to ask us for action anymore. So I guess I'm asking this group, as we talk about the various issues, is there a possibility of maybe a task team developing a way to consider what action might be taken by this and or a broader group? I guess I'll stop with that. That's the question, is, as we've talked about what might be, what the issues are, we all have stories, but can we develop a task team that begins to think about, well, what if we did this, or, just actions?
Thank you so much. Actually, it's something we've started to talk about, and we're going to expand both with this committee as well as some other groups with which some of us are involved And we'll be in touch to talk about how to develop that. And for all of us, no matter where we are, even though this is lovely for us to have this big group discussion, the way I think we're going to really learn even better is when we can be in the small groups where we can share experiences in a more intimate way and really listen and talk about what's going on to enhance healing. There's one church group that's going on called Changing Hearts that Peg Tabor is part of, and she said that they are working on this. There are others who are either in play or, again, as we said, we're going to, the Changing Hearts attempts to address the actions needed that we can do. So we're going to hear about that another time, and we will talk about plans to get together and start addressing this, not just on a large scale, but on a small heart-to-heart scale as well. I do, and it will keep going, but I do want to say how much we appreciate that the candor that's being shared, that even in a large group, we can have these heart-to-heart discussions, because this is where it starts. This is caring about one another as we reach out. So
Christine has been waiting patiently, Jackie.
Thank you. Thanks,
Yeah.
Chris.
Okay, so I wanted to say something about education and our public education, which is obviously under fire. We have a lot of charter schools now, we have homeschooling, we have this, that. Basically, the idea is that public schooling doesn't work. A book that, or a speaker that was seminal for me in understanding this kind of thing was Heather Cox Richardson at Boston College, who was writing about how the South won the Civil War. And if you look at education, like 200 years ago or so, in the North, you have Protestants who wanted people to read so they could read the Bible. And in the South, you had plantation owners who wanted their family to read, but none of their servants or whatever needed education because they should just do work. So that's a kind of just a philosophical split right there. And then, so, I think the North kind of like won. They decided we should have public education. After the Civil War, the South had, terrible education for years and years. The South, everybody in the South just had horrible education, but that's gotten a little bit better. But I was thinking recently, even the idea that we have, that I bet, even though we're talking about racism, we're talking about all this, but the idea of gifted and talented in schools, or the way we separate who's in the university track versus who is in the practical, mechanics and that. When I was in school, this is back in the 60s, it was only the people in the university track that got chemistry, that got history, and world history was even an elective. I didn't even take world history. And then you get to college, you major in something, you've never had world history. Now, how can we get everybody on board for like the pandemic? We're talking about viruses and they've never had biology and chemistry, half of the people. So if you just think about, like the Trump people that are blue collar whites, the education they had was in the practical side. They didn't have any history. They didn't even have American history. I mean, it's overwhelming to think about that. But this idea, I think of, we were talking about who's winning, who's losing. Well, if we decided we weren't going to have gifted and talented programs anymore, I bet almost everybody in this group would say, oh, but my grandson is so special and he's in this advanced placement American history class that is so wonderful and he is getting, and if you don't have that, the big loss. But I think we are all losing. I mean, I remember one little kid, he said, oh, you know, I'm in the gifted and talented English program, and we all took a field trip downtown, and we went to the Shakespeare Theater, and we got to meet the actors afterwards, and it was so exciting. And I was pissed off. And I thought, don't you think those kids that hate school are the ones who would love that? And I bet your mother would have taken you to that Shakespeare play if you had asked. Your mother had the money, she could do it. Why is that group of kids getting to go to the Shakespeare theater and see this? Because they're gifted and talented. Well, of course they're gifted and talented. You keep making things so wonderful and exciting for them. You know, why don't you take, I don't know. So I just I get crazy when I hear gifted and talented kids talk about the special benefits they get.
Christine, what a wonderful point you're making, to realize that we've had segregation in so many ways. And thank you, I love for opening at least my mind. I see a lot of nodding heads. We might have thought of that before, we may not have, but again, when we talk about inclusion and equity, what an important point you're making. We're losing so much when we discriminate and create differences between people. You know, so thank you for that comment. So I think what you're sharing, and I think we've been touching on, is what we can gain if everyone gets to participate, if it's in voting, if it's in education, any of these areas. We're looking at what we can gain, because we are identifying certainly willingness for people to say, I don't care if you lose, as long as some people lose too, but we are losing so much. And why should that be the case? Does it make sense, right? If you heard somebody to say to you, I'll cut my toe off to make sure that you don't have toes. Would that make sense? So that's what we've been going to. So I'm
Gay.
Do we have a comment?
Yeah,
Good.
we do. Gay wants to say something.
Good.
I just wanted to add a comment about the education that Christine was discussing. There are also homeschooled children, a huge number in where I used to be in Michigan, and also the charter schools. Children are not getting the same education. I mean, back in the day when my mother, she was born in 1913, went to school, everybody had the same education. You went to the school and you just, you learn to write and you learn to read. And nowadays, our children are so divided by all of these different education programs that we have. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Jackie, can I make a comment about education? It's really good for me to hear so many people pushing education. I'm usually the one who beats that particular horse to death, but it certainly strikes me as where we need to be focusing our attention. In the wake of the 2020 election and everything that happened after it, there has been a flurry of interest across the country in civics education. The notion being that we really need to teach our kids how the government works, how to be a voter, those kinds of things. I went to high school about 100 years ago, and we had civics in a number of different places through the curriculum, but in high school, we had a full year class in civics and government, okay? I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and our local chapter has been exploring civics education in the state of Florida. The conclusion that we came to is that civics education in the state of Florida is in reasonably good shape compared to everybody else in the country. And on that comparison level, we're actually better. We require a semester of civics in high school. So it's not just Florida, it's the entire country that needs to rethink what they want to put into education to not only provide content as an underpinning for whatever people do, but to also teach them, critical thinking skills. And when they hear stuff that is clearly BS, that they can actually say, that makes no sense whatsoever. So education is important. We can't sit back and say, yeah, it's being taken care of. Look how good Florida's doing. No, a semester of civics is not sufficient. And by the way, we don't know what implicit biases are being conveyed, even in mandated courses. So education is a huge area that many of us come out of that field. So we have a sense of what goes on. It's more than a lifelong undertaking, and it's crucially important. So, Jackie.
I would like to just before I know we have another hand raised, and you make a very important point, but I wonder if, and we go back even to when we talked about teaching children, the underpinning I would suggest might be teaching virtues. If we teach virtues to our children and continue with those in the school, and what is a virtue? Honesty, truthfulness, respect, listening, service, these sorts of things. If we were to make those the beginning, a basis upon which we, or investigation of the truth for ourselves, perhaps this too could create change. It could impact our educational system as well as how people treat each other. Virtues, just something to keep in mind. So I offer that, and we can do that with, certainly we can do that with our grandchildren. We can practice it with each other. And I'd offer that as another issue to, as we interact with the educational system, to consider. So we had some other hands raised.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Christine to wait again because Judy Bond has her hand up and she hasn't spoken yet.
You don't want me to get started. I just wanted to make a comment. The Wildwood Elementary School has I don't know how they're doing it now, but when I was there, it had all the supplies available to teach the virtues that you're talking about. And in some cases, teachers did. I think it was optional. But I know that it was there because I used some of it as a counselor. And I know other teachers also used some of it. So it wasn't that it wasn't there, but it wasn't required. And I wanted to ask you, Jackie, does that stem from a religious basis? Because that may have been why not everybody grabbed it.
Well, I think I'll say that for any of us who may have a spiritual bent, I will say yes, that comes from a religious basis. Nonetheless, in my opinion, regardless of what faith we are or if we are no faith, these are basic. These are basics that create a civil society, and I think couched in that framework, perhaps it could have had a broader perspective.
Probably, but I just wanted to ask because I wondered why it wasn't taught throughout the school system or throughout. the school anyway.
Yeah.
And that may have had something to do with it. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now.
Thank you,
I did-
Judy.
Yeah. Nancy
I
Nelson
just-
has a comment in the chat, which I think is really important. She says, one of my concerns is the amount of lies that are perpetuated about the validity of the recent election. Some of my Republican friends believe the election was not fair.
I just wanted to say that, like, I really envy Linda for having civics or whatever it was called in high school as a required subject. But in Michigan, when I was growing up, and I don't know what the laws are across the US, but I think, at least it used to be, that students were required to be in school until they were 14. That you would be truant if you did not come to school until you were 14. But after that, it was optional. So that was 8th grade, 8th or 9th grade. And that's when we had civics, and you can understand, or we had social studies in 8th grade. So as an 8th grader in Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is supposed to be a pretty good school system, we learned what we thought was American history and how the government worked in 8th grade. Well, now most students, I think, go through 12th grade. And so instead of and of course, 8th grade was just before people didn't have to come anymore. So you could see why they put it there. But now that most kids go till they're 18, it should be as a senior in high school when they're just about ready to be able to vote. And I think, I don't remember which Supreme Court justice retired early, 10 or 15 years ago, with a mission of going back to Vermont and trying to get civics in all the high schools. And I think he's working on that. But I just wanted to say that historically.
Thank you. Back to you, Jackie.
Thank you. Do we have any other? We have a few more.
Lynn Hunter. Where is Lynn?
She's here waiting to unmute.
I tried to unmute myself. There it goes.
There you go.
Right. I taught high school not too long ago, and tried desperately to get a virtues curriculum built into the high school curriculum. And we were at that time, we were doing a lot with cooperative learning, and I loved cooperative learning and got a lot of training in it and did as much of it as I could possibly do. And in that context, we wanted to do some virtues lessons. The objection came from parents who were afraid that that would be against their own religion. They were so nervous about what we would teach. As many times as we said, we're talking about honesty, manners, being polite. They're virtues that are common to all religions. And I helped to start a charter school, and cooperative learning was going to be a major component of that charter school. And there was so much objection from people from religion. It was religionists that we had to go to Raleigh. This is North Carolina. We had to go to Raleigh and try to defend what we were going to do. And actually, we had to compromise. In the end, we had to take out the meditation piece. But the objection to teaching values came from people who feared that that would conflict with their religious beliefs and that virtues should be taught at home. But virtues weren't being taught at home. So when the schools tried to pick up the banner, they objected.
That's an interesting point, Lynn. And I can see that. I've heard people complain on that level. But if I come back to a content level, my daughter was in high school. She was going into 9th grade. And we had an open house night, go visit the teachers and find out what's going on. And we got to her history class, US history. And the teacher really bemoaned a couple of things. One was the content that now needed to be included about Native Americans, Indigenous peoples. And he was really venting to us about how that messed up his curriculum. But to fit it in, because it was mandated, hold on to your hats, folks, he spent a week playing Dances with Wolves in 43.5-minute segments. But they got to the end of the week that he had set aside for this movie, and the movie wasn't over, so nobody saw the end. I'm just going to leave that on the table. Think about that for a while. So, you know, you all are arguing powerfully and passionately for virtues being included, like honesty. I mean, honesty, who would argue with that? I would argue that the biases of teachers, regardless of the mandate, is going to skew what happens in the classroom. And, you know, our kids are not being taught enough to evaluate what's being presented to them and ask critical questions. So I think that it's a concern. And although Lisa had to leave, I think her point is absolutely essential, that we need to focus on education, and we need to start at preschool and see what happens throughout. The other thing that came up with that teacher, which I still haven't recovered from, he was talking about how he evaluated students' learning, and it was all multiple choice tests. Linda, the teacher, raises her hand and says, "Are you having them write at all?" "Oh, no, they're too young to ask them to do that." Education needs to be our focus. Our children are our future, and they need to be infused with accurate, correct content and appropriate values.
Linda, thank you. I think we have one more comment from Jim, and then we're going to start wrapping this up because we have a couple more things to go over. So,
okay.
Jim, share.
Greetings all. Just a very brief comment. You remember years ago there was this spring forward to establish these character cities of character and character coalitions that were really promoting virtues and values. And I think that community-based grassroots experience was a good one. Unfortunately, in a lot of places, it just faded away. So I think we have to energize ourselves at that level. On the point of teaching virtues and values in our educational system, I'll just give you an example that in where I spent a good part of my life in Augusta, Georgia, there were two brave white women educators who took a position to establish a magnet school in a fine arts focus. They required that 50% of that school should be African American. And then they divided out the other half with other people of different cultural backgrounds. That was a rather brave step, but what it was signaling is that there is a particular focus and need for African Americans in particular. And this was in the city of Augusta itself. Advance forward, this was done in the late 80s. In the 90s, that school was the #1 rated school in the state. It excelled all others, including the Atlanta metro area, in terms of their educational success. Those kids were going to Harvard and other places. My own children, it was a slam dunk to get into college. There was a great focus on that diversity, and I think there's a lesson to be learned there. So that's just a story and an experience that I think points out something very critical. One last point, and this speaks to Linda. Bias and prejudice for our teachers. I think when we talk about education, we have to talk about the full range, right? From elementary school straight on through graduate school. Our teachers' curriculums really need to have a focus where they address prejudice and racism and bias. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Interesting that it's so helpful to hear an example of how effective that was. But we had a very interesting comment that Suzanne made. And if I may read it with all respect, she's well gotten it, but she says she does want to remind everyone we had 4 years of a president that primarily lied every single day of his presidency, with the biggest lie being that he won the election. How do we teach virtues if the most prominent American did not have any? We have to struggle with this for many years to come. I did feel that was an interesting and important comment, and that might show my bias, but it goes back. Let's think about it. We do have a lot of forces we have to combat. Let's remember we each have a sphere of influence. Our behavior is a way that we both teach and inspire one another. And it's how we teach our children. It's how we relate to one another. It's how we talk to our grandchildren. So yes, we might have to identify that there's a difference between a truth and a lie. And there are those who believe it. But again, we each, sometimes we may feel powerless. But we do have power, and that is again in how we behave, how we demonstrate our beliefs in action, regardless of our background. We're all learning, we're all trying, well, many of us are trying to be better and figure this out. And we know no matter how old we are, we're still learning until we take our last breath. One of the things I want to share is, we must continue to be dedicated to this issue, to eliminate racism and the way we view others, and that we continue to have hope. And I think about, even though this is a huge topic, I think about, or a huge challenge, I think about something SB shared from her dad, that there are no hills or mountains when we have a strong will. And certainly I think we need to have hats off to our Black brothers and sisters, those of color who, in spite of overwhelming challenges, keep pushing forward and have hope. And God willing, we as allies take up the cause and walk hand in hand to help create change. So sorry, I don't mean to ask for an amen, because this is not, this is the AAUW, but again, let us hope that we can, in working to demonstrate and develop our higher selves, work on creating this change that we know is necessary in our country and around the world. So I do want to, I think, we talked about education and children. We did start out talking about voting and voting rights. And we see how all of this ties together, right? These are not isolated. But if you would indulge us, we do have some polling questions to bring us back to the voting aspect. And we are going to, let's see, if you would, this polling, as it always is anonymous. So if we could just go back. Here. Oh, did you just put that up, Linda?
Yeah, I thought you were getting ready to put up the poll.
Yes, okay, I had a slide. That's great. Everyone can see that. So we see the questions. If you would respond, is voting a right or a privilege? Prior to the 2020 election, were you aware of modern day voter suppression? Do you think it's important that everyone be allowed to vote? And do you feel like your voice is being silenced? Okay. Good. All right. It looks like we have 95% have voted. So Linda, would you like to share the results? So the question was asked, is voting a right or a privilege? And 100% said voting is a right. So we don't believe it's a privilege, it's a right. Prior to the 2020 election, were you aware of modern day voter suppression? 86% yes, 14% no. Good thing we're talking about this, isn't it? Do you think that it's important that everyone be allowed to vote? 100% yes. Do you feel like your voice is being silenced? 38% said yes, 62% said no. So thank you very much for participating in the polling. So we asked you to hold off on announcements until the end. And here we go. Let's get through this. We did our polling questions. So we're going to ask, does anyone have any announcements that they'd like to share? Something going on in your community, a book? Would you share? There was something you put up there. Otherwise, I'll share it. Jim Shear, would you like to just share that? I can't see you, so I'm not sure. It's okay.
Yeah, I was just going to remind folks that next month, the National Race Amity Conference, it's a centenary celebration. They've been in existence for 100 years. They're going to have a virtual conference between May 21st and 23rd. You can get details regarding the National Race Amity group by just going to raceamity.org. And it's in the chat as well.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Jim. Does anyone else have an announcement they'd like to make? Okay, well, your diversity committee, we have announcements to make. So Linda Carpenter, I think you have an announcement you'd like to share.
Yeah, I've got a couple of them. This one actually comes from Jill Moss Greenberg. She just sent it this morning. And I apologize for the short notice, but this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, there will be a town hall discussion hosted by the Maryland African American Museum and Culture Center. It's a town hall entitled Living While Black. The leaders in the Black community there, some leaders from the Black community are going to be talking about social justice, policing, and the outcomes of the Derek Chauvin case, as well as things that people can do in the area of social justice. I put the link to register in the chat, and it's all the way at the top of the chat because I put it in at the very beginning of the session. If you're interested, we can forward the flyer that Jill sent to me this morning so that you can see a little bit more about the program if you're interested in seeing that. Jackie, I think I forwarded it to you, so you could send that out if you wish.
I'll be happy to send that out. Thank you.
Do you want me to talk about the others that are on that slide?
I'm going to pull them up, and here we go. You could, if you'd like to.
Okay. We saw a film on Netflix, and some of you may have heard about it. It won the live action short Oscar the other night. It is called Two Distant Strangers. It runs for about 32 or 33 minutes. I've watched a lot of videos and read a lot of things and watched a lot of movies in the last year or so, and this is one of the most gripping things I have seen. If you don't know about it, it's a gentleman who wakes up with a young woman and wants to head home to get his dog. He's a Black man, and the entire video is him running through a loop of increasingly more horrific chases with the police. And I will tell you, I was on the edge of my chair. It's quite powerful, and we would recommend it to you all. The other one is an event that's coming up on May 25th. If you are not aware of the Center for the Healing of Racism, they are located in Houston, Texas. They've been in existence, I think, since the 80s. They've been around a long time, and they run some of the most wonderful programs that are really geared to not just education and increasing our awareness, but in healing from the trauma that this has laid on people. On May 25th, which is a date that I think will live in infamy, they are holding a commemoration for George Floyd. It is at 10 a.m. Central Time, so depending on what time zone you're in, do the appropriate adjustment. It is entitled Say His Name, commemorating George Floyd, and you will need to register ahead of time. The last thing that we would like to mention is a new book that just came out a couple of weeks ago called No Common Ground. It's by a historian by the name of Karen L. Cox, C-O-X, and she is writing about Confederate monuments, but it's a very different tale than the one that we saw in Mitch Landrieu's book. This is a historical analysis, not only of the efforts to memorialize the Confederacy, but the pushback from the African-American community against those efforts. So it's unusual in that regard, but it's a relatively easy read, and I would recommend it to you. That's all.
I'll take over for here. Thank you, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something, we will add these in our updated resources. We've sent them to you before, and if you have any others you'd like to share, certainly you can send them to the committee.
I have a quick question. I just wondered if people on your committee, when we list all these really great books that we could read, is somebody giving those to the Sumter County Library as a request for them to buy them? Because I've found that a lot of books on racism are not in the library. So I would like to have us do that, whoever might be.
Christine, that's a great suggestion. Many of the books are, but we will send the lists. We are now compiling version number 3. So there are a lot of books out there that we are recommending, that people have recommended to us. I like the idea of sending it to the library. Good idea. We'll do that.
Thank you so much for that, Christine. So we do want to let you know that our next meeting is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be May 26th, the fourth Wednesday month. But because for the last 9 months, we've been doing a lot of learning, reading, watching, we are going to create or use next month's meeting. We're going to have that as an open discussion based on what we've learned and discussed for the past 9 months. So we will be resending to you all the preparatory materials that we've recommended prior to each program. We hope you'll review them, maybe bring other things so that we actually have an unstructured discussion where y'all bring to the table things you've learned, experiences you've had, recommendations and suggestions. And we'll look forward to seeing how that, in this culture of learning, how that goes. And we look forward to your participating in that and preparing for it. So we look forward to seeing you with that new, new format for next month. Now, in addition, we want to let you know, since summer is coming up and a lot of folks might be traveling or doing whatever else, we are going to go on a, if you would, a summer schedule, and we're going to have one meeting over the summer. And that meeting is going to be held on Wednesday, July 28th. So we'll have a May meeting, we'll have a July meeting. And then we'll come back to our regular rhythm of monthly starting back in September. Now, our July meeting should be also very interesting. And of course, we're going to remind you and send you information about it. But that July meeting is where we're going to present and talk about purpose-built communities. So that should also be a wonderful opportunity to learn more, and we'll look forward to sharing and discussing that with you. So before we go, we want to send you off with something to think about. And that is, and no doubt it's become apparent through our discussions, the question is, how can you or we come to terms with the contradictions between the ideals of our country, which is we, the people, with the reality of our country, inequality and injustice? You know, people of color were once compared to the black pupil of the eye, surrounded by the white. In this black pupil, you see the reflection of what is before you. Do we like the reflection of what we see before us in the way that we treat the folks in our family of man? As whites witness and have benefited unconsciously or consciously from systemic racism, can we continue to look away with a clear conscience and do nothing? Perhaps as part of our next session and as part of the discussion, we can include things that we can do. So we want to thank you today for participating in this discussion, and we look forward to seeing you next month on May 26th. Thank you all again. It's been a privilege to be together, and we wish you all health and joy and deep thinking. So thank you all. Till next time.